If you want to get a first-hand account of what happened to the Spanish Armada during its attempted invasion of England, and this is obviously during the Elizabethan period, this book is spectacular for you. The inner workings and motivations of each side shine through beautifully, and in some way, the editor achieves a narrative structure, even by simply going back and forth between the sides in separate chapters. So I will give you some highlights and thoughts on the matter, and I think it will allow you to at least get a feel for the book and maybe entice you to get it. So stay tuned. Welcome to biblioCultist, where I review books that I find interesting in topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video, and check out my socials. I'll put it here on the bottom and on the side, my Ko-Fi link, so you can check out my merch, and also you can donate a single or a recurring amount if you appreciate what I'm doing here and you want to help me finance it. But doing all these things, watching the video, commenting, liking it, sharing it, will really help me out. And again, I appreciate it. In this episode, I'm going over The Great Enterprise, the history of the Spanish Armada, and it was edited and put together nicely by Simon Usherwood. This edition is from the Folio Society, 1978. And I got this on an antique shop, actually, and it's in good shape. The only thing that's a little beat up would be the slipcase, but again, that's the whole point of the slipcase, is to protect the book. So if the slipcase gets beat up a little bit, that's fine. That's the whole point of it, to serve as a kind of buffer between itself and the book. I love Folio Society. They always make great books, and these older Folio Society books were more about the content, in the sense that they tended to be more obscure. And although Folio Society still does great work, it seems to be a lot more pop in the sense of the kinds of books that they will publish. But again, not a complaint. I like everything they do so far, so I do miss these kind of old, obscure type of books that they used to do in the 70s and 80s. And ironically, those are the ones you find actually pretty cheap online. And in my opinion, they're quite worth it. So if you can find them, get them. They tend to always have really good subjects in them. Now, this book presents the actual letters and communications on each side of this conflict. So it allows the reader to get a direct, first-hand perspective on everything that was going on. And because it has a technical element, I was assuming it was going to be a little dry, but actually it has a lot of emotion in it as well. Because you get the fear and you get the loathing, especially at the end, of the entire process. Now, to be very straightforward, this conflict would have never happened if Henry VIII wouldn't have made the terrible decision of disrespecting his Spanish wife and going through the entire somewhat inane process of trying to get an annulment for his marriage, a divorce, how it is presented for some, although the main objective was really an annulment, predicated on the premise that it was invalid because of their close kinship, although they had gotten an exception to be married based on this kinship. So obviously, what Henry VIII is asking the church is quite dramatic. And of course, as many of you know, he ended up creating his own church and then marrying the mother of Queen Elizabeth, who then ended up decapitated as a heretic. So, as you can see, the process of that time period that Henry VIII began was quite chaotic and bloody, and it led directly to this particular situation. Because by the time Elizabeth becomes queen, she is assuming the Protestant sect, and therefore she is persecuting the Catholic one with torture, murder, executions, etc. So suddenly the main religion at the time in the country of England became a persecuted group that eventually became a minority until this day. But the process was kind of nasty, and it's all because of Henry VIII's attempt to get an annulment, to get an heir. If we want to see him in a positive perspective, his entire obsession was about an heir, but at the same time, it was clearly a violation of Catholic doctrine to do it the way he was attempting to do it. And it changed history, for good or bad, depending on your perspective. So without spoiling much of this work, I do want to point out a few standouts. Elizabeth enforced a new Anglican rite, which used the vernacular language, and this led to a lot of Catholics, and that includes actual Protestants, to reject participation in such a rite, and they were willing to risk torture and death just to preserve the Latin Mass. And this obviously is very interesting today because the Novus Ordo religion that came out of the Second Vatican Council also turned the Roman rite into a vernacular and even changed some very important elements of the entire rite, which was in itself a motivator to die as martyrs in England to preserve a rite that eventually the Catholic Church itself abandons. And if you don't see the irony, and you can even argue tragedy of this, I don't know what else would it be. Now, some people would argue that the whole thing is silly, but of course that would be a secularist or non-Catholic perspective, and I understand that. But if you look at it from that religious point of view, this entire battle is about protecting the rights of Catholics to practice their religion, which at their heart would be the Latin Mass. And changing that eventually anyway makes the whole battle seem ridiculous. And that could be seen as either a condemnation of the belief in the rite itself or a condemnation of the church that decides to betray their old martyrs for the sake of adjusting to modern times. Could be seen either way. I'm just putting it out there how dramatically important that is to consider. Now, the participation of Sir Francis Drake is important to remember, and I don't think his genius should be understated because he was a pivotal character in this story, and he's famous for either being a pirate from one perspective or being a hero from another. Either way, his participation was crucial, and his fanaticism for Protestantism, or at least that particular form of Protestantism, is quite clear. So he was a main character in this whole battle. From the Spanish perspective, they were rescuing English Catholics from persecution, and therefore this was seen as a crusade. Now, of course, you had financial, political interest here because you had this whole kingdom open to be transferred eventually to the Spanish king, Philip II, who would be the liberator of England and now would have a huge prize on his belt. Also, from the writings, it is quite clear that the Spanish Armada was not ready for this particular battle. The leadership seems to be problematic, to say the least. The recruitment seemed to be terrible, and there's plenty of letters there complaining about the quality of the men that they had to work with as sailors, many of them being actually even too old or having huge families and thus being too much concerned about that instead of what young men tend to care about, which is glory and victory, etc. So there's even a complaint about that. And the provisions available seem to be quite dire, to the point that even before getting to the battle, they already were suffering from lack of provisions. And that tells you a lot. Plus, coordinating with their Dutch contacts also seems to be quite chaotic, thus bringing even more trouble for this enterprise from the very beginning, because as you see the letters, you can go through the chronology, and way before you could also see a problem. Now, I do want to present a quote here that can give you a mood of the Spanish perspective on this conflict. This is an exhortation by Medina Sidonia, which is basically the main admiral in this battle. Quote, "The saints of heaven will go in our company, and particularly the holy patrons of Spain, and those of England itself, who are persecuted by the heretics, and cry aloud to God for vengeance, will come out to meet us and aid us, as well as those who sacrificed their lives in establishing our holy faith in the land, and watered it with their blood. There we shall find awaiting us the aid of blessed John Fisher, of Thomas More, of John Forrest, and of innumerable holy Carthusians, Franciscans, and other religious men, whose blood was cruelly shed by King Henry, and who called to God to avenge them from the land in which they died." So that gives you a flavor of the mood, highly religious tone, and it's clear that this particular battle is about religion more than anything else. Now, even though it is quite clear that the conflict was truly lost by the Spanish, in the sense that their timing was bad, the weather was really at the heart of the opposition here, and it reminds me of the kamikaze story over there in Japan, where you have a divine wind that miraculously saves the day. You have the same kind of general feel in this famous battle. Nonetheless, we just can't discount the courage and the genius of the English defense, its leadership, which in my opinion was actually excellent. So you're pitting here terrible leadership at this point in time for the Spanish with really good leadership at that same time in the English side. And even the Queen herself deserves a lot of merit. Her exchanges with her admirals and the troops themselves seems to have been quite effective and powerful. So let me give you a quote in that vein. And this is from Her Majesty's speech to the troops at Tilbury, 9th of August, 1588. I won't read the whole thing, but I will read this part, which I think it's poignant. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm, to which, rather than any dishonor shall grow by me, I myself will take up arms. I myself will be your general, judge, and rewarder of every one of your virtues in the field. I know already for your forwardness, and you have deserved rewards and crowns. And we do assure you, in the word of a prince, they shall be duly paid you." The whole thing is actually a wonderful speech, and clearly, aside from her persecutions of the Catholics and the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, which I think it was a travesty, especially in the way it was done, I do think that merit should be given to the leadership of the English at the time, and the Queen herself had a large part to do with that. Now, for Spain, this was a moral and literal catastrophe, and I believe that the Spanish still haven't recovered from it, to be quite straightforward with you. They lost half of their men just in that small engagement, and it really shattered the confidence of the Spanish Empire, and it turned a lot of people in Spain into non-interventionists, which obviously would be a problematic position to take if you're an empire. It may be the reasonable approach to global politics, but that doesn't change the fact that if you're an empire and you stop acting like an empire, you will lose your empire. So, all in all, great book, an important book due to its first-hand accounts, which is usually not very common. Most writers, what they do is they'll just create a narrative out of the first-hand narratives. But this editor, he decided just to put the first-hand narratives, translate them, and work them in a way that fits into a narrative. And I think that's a better method, and it grants a lot more value to the work. So I highly suggest reading this book if you want to get a feel for the historical period, for the people involved, and Also because it is an important pivoting point in history. If that battle would have gone the other way, our world would look very different. So please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video. Don't forget to check out my merch as well. So I really appreciate you being with me. See you next time.